Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ceres Podcast. In this episode, we have something a little different, but well within Mark's expertise. Mark sits down and talks to Dr. Claire Markham of Nottingham, Trent University, whose research explores the changing role of rural pubs in British life. Together, they discuss why the pub is more than just about pints, from their identity, belonging and local culture to the commercial pressures that are putting many of these great institutions at risk. It's a thoughtful conversation about community, nostalgia and survival, and what happens when the places that hold local life together begin to disappear. Running out of stock at the wrong time is a big problem that no fish and chip shop needs. At Ceres, we focus on the things that matter most: consistency, clear cut-off times, and deliveries arriving when we say they will. From natural batter mix, pre-dust to deep fry cleaner and heavy-duty descaler, we supply outlets across the UK with products that we've developed, and customers rely on these products week after week. Most businesses don't change suppliers on a whim, they change because something went wrong, and our job is to make sure it doesn't. If you already know what works in your shop, reordering should be really simple. So click away at ceres.shop and let us do the hard work. I hope you enjoy this episode with Mark Petrou and Dr. Claire Markham.
Claire, it's really good to have you here. Thank you so much for giving me your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So you are actually Dr. Claire Markham. Let me read out your official title. You are Senior Lecturer and Course Leader in Sociology and Criminology at Nottingham, Trent University. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
You're a very clever lady. With such an interesting field of expertise, what made you dive deep into rural pubs? What was it that made you go after that as a subject?
So it's kind of a bit of it's not a long story, but it's an interesting story. So once I finished my undergraduate degrees and master's degrees in criminology, I wanted to do a PhD. But I wanted to do a PhD that was not just academic in its scope, i.e. I wanted to do something that would help communities. And at the time, there'd been lots of pub closures, pub shut-ins, reopenings, shut-ins, particularly in rural areas. Obviously, that was not a new phenomenon, but it was one that I had become much more aware of through my granddad.
Yeah.
So I've lived in the same village all my life. So has my granddad. Well, he's passed away now. And my dad. And my granddad used to use the pub kind of in the evenings and at the weekends to go and meet his other friends.
Yeah.
He couldn't drive. And he'd been doing that for years. I mean, literally from the 1960s, 70s onwards.
Yeah.
And suddenly he had nowhere to go when the pub shut. And the decline in him through his mental health and also just his demeanour was like, wow, these spaces mean so much more than just alcohol.
Yeah.
And as I said, he couldn't drive. We don't have great public transport.
Because you're a yellow belly, aren't you? You're from Lincolnshire.
Yes.
Yeah.
So public transport isn't great.
No.
He had a choice, really, of trying to get into town or try and go to the next village along. Well, the next village along's pub was also through that period of opening and closing.
Yeah.
So he declined and so did his friends. And it got me thinking at the time, well, we're talking about post offices. So this is in the heat of the kind of when post offices were closing. And that was all in the news. And I was thinking, right, what are we doing in relation to other services, such as the pub? When I looked into it, there was very little academic research at that point. There are a few of us now who do that.
Yeah.
But back in 2009, 2010, when I started my PhD, there was nothing academic. Don't get me wrong, there were some brilliant books about like the history of the pub and about, for example, media sources on kind of the pub being the centre of the hub, the village, if you like, or the town. But there was very little academic evidence to back that up. And it got me thinking, well, if there was academic evidence, would that put stronger emphasis when you were like presenting? So, for example, when the media and publicans are presenting the arguments to policymakers, government,
ministers, yeah.
Does that give it a bit more oomph because it's got the academic research behind it?
Yeah.
So that's where I decided to focus on it. And I found it so interesting that I kind of stayed with it and I've kept it as my expertise. The other thing to say is I personally don't drink alcohol. I don't like the taste of it.
Yeah.
But I still use the pub, which says to me and offers me the ability to say to people, hang on a minute, you don't have to drink. It doesn't have to be around alcohol. There's much more to these spaces. So that's where I've kind of gone. That's how I got into it. After that, though, I started to get very interested in not only the social, but also the cultural, the history around pubs and what we lose when they close or change names and all this kind of thing and the imagery around it. And then the sustainability of them, because this is the thing. Obviously, they're a business,
yes,
just like everything is a business. It has to be at least at its very minimum breaking even.
Yeah,
and that's before you think. Ideally, it needs to be making a profit in order to be sustainable. But as kind of things happen, pandemic, cost of living crisis, lots of people haven't got the disposable income they had to go in and use them. At the same time, raw materials and energy costs, etc., are going through the roof.
Yeah.
So how do you balance the two? And we're hearing lots at the moment about, for example, the impact of the decline and the loss of the British institution. But what can we actually do? There's what the government can do, and there's those elements. But if you take their latest policy, whilst it's helpful to pubs, it doesn't really help the rest of it doesn't help the rest of hospitality.
Yeah.
So then are people going to end up resenting one institution, one type of hospitality venue over another? So it's kind of all unpicking those. So that's where I'm kind of interested now around how people are perceiving the pub and do they perceive it as different to other hospitality venues, but also with the recognition that actually they're so intertwined. So again, I speak to my students and they'll say that they'll use a pub before going to the club.
Yes.
I'll speak to older people and they will say, well, I go to the pub for a drink or something and then I go on to, I don't know, fish and chip shop or the shop or something. They then go on. So it acts as that springboard.
Yes.
So is there something different? And if so, how do we kind of engage with that to showcase that again to those who are in the decision making around it? Also, again, the decisions around, is there the right type of legislation for the right type of pub, if that makes sense? Again, there's very different things that freeholds can do compared to tenanted pubs. And again, even to the aspect of gaining raw materials, tenanting pubs can be obviously at a loss from the right outset. And then if they make more profit, they can kind of see their rates, etc., go up. So it's kind of like, where do we stand? And there's lots to unpack. And as an academic, there's like so much you can research.
Yeah.
But you've got to limit yourself to make sure you can do justice to the aspect you're doing and then start to move on.
It's incredible, really, just listening to to you talk for those few minutes. I've been scribbling down furiously because you unpacked so much there that I want to dive deep into. That I'm now thinking, Where do I begin?
Yeah.
I guess when you look back at how pubs have evolved and changed over the years, I guess they started off really as, I'm thinking of like Dick Turpin in a tavern plotting,
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking about workers, trade unions, dockers forming clubs and meeting and discussing stuff after work, and then I think about the sort of the indulgent, excessive 80s when everybody started drinking fizzy alcohol and partying, and I just think how pubs have changed and evolved and adapted. And I guess being a doctor in sociology, you've looked at all of that as well. But then you mentioned freehold and tenanted pubs. And I think my listeners would benefit from knowing that if you're in a tenanted pub, the person that actually sells you the beer is also your landlord. And if you're successful, they'll put the rent up and they'll put the price of the beer up. So you are what some people may know it as being in a tied house. You're tied to a brewery and you can't hide your success. If you order more beer, they know you're taking more money, so they put your rent up and they increase the price of your beer. It makes me wonder, are breweries actually really interested in the success of the tenant? Do they want to make more money from rent than they do from beer? It seems like a broken system. And if you're a freeholder, then you're in a completely different situation because you can buy your beer wherever you like. And there's so much in that we could go off on a tangent and just talk about that. What I want to stay focused on, though, is drawing comparisons between the rural pub and the local chippy, because I've owned pubs and I've owned freeholds of pubs. I sold one of mine to Wetherspoons and I sold two of mine to Marsden's. And as soon as I sold my two to Marsden's, they put my rent up and they put my beer up. And the busier I got, the more money they made and the less money I made. What I really want to know from you is, what's the current state of rural pubs? And because I won't lie, at the moment, fish and chip shops are struggling.
Yeah. Rural pubs are struggling.
Yeah.
Actually, as we know, all pubs are struggling. Rural pubs have, particularly where I live in Lincolnshire, you've got kind of other issues alongside the ones you've already mentioned. So again, if you've got a pub in the middle of Nottingham or a pub in the middle of Lincoln, okay, the population is higher. Okay, it's often more accessible, not for everyone, but by and large, it's a more accessible space to get to. And it's kind of like you will have almost like a tourist trade going through as well.
Yeah.
So you'll have your locals, okay, not all pubs obviously, but definitely ones in city centre will then also benefit from the tourists who are going to those areas.
Yeah.
You think about a rural pub, it's predominantly, unless it's near the coastal areas, which is slightly different, it predominantly relies on locals.
Yeah. The
issue with that is, well, there are different things to it. At the minute, people have got less income, so they're not able to go as much. Okay, so that's one.
Yeah.
Linked to that, take kind of jobs. People are having to work more or more jobs in order to basically just survive, which means their time to visit any kind of venue, hospitality venue, leisure venue is probably diminished compared to what it was.
Yeah.
Combine that with, again, the accessibility to rural areas. So again, obviously we can't drink and drive, rightly so.
Yeah.
And as I said, I don't drink alcohol, but again, many people do, and they like to have a drink alongside if they're having a meal or whatever. So you can't drink and drive, as I said, absolutely rightly so. But there's no public transport either. So it's kind of like, well, where do you go?
Yeah.
Some villages have had 3 or 4 pubs over history that have now gone to 1. So again, where are people going? And we have to remember with these places, as much as they are social spaces, and I am so passionate about that, historically, these have been spaces of exclusion and division.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we know historically, up until about the 90s, women were not really seen as being accepted, particularly within the rural pub, and sometimes that still exists today. those notions that if you walk in and you're on your own or you're not local, what are you doing here? Those, even though people are not saying it, you often feel it. I feel it as a researcher.
Yeah.
So it's only in recent times that those spaces have become much more accepting of, for example, women, but also children as well. So on the weekends and things like that. So there are some people who have got memories and ideas from the past.
Yeah.
And again, that's totally understandable because
it's established behaviour, isn't it?
Yeah, it's what they've been kind of
conditioned. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got different perceptions, but also combined with the accessibility, also combined with, obviously, predominantly, and this is not to kind of make a sweeping statement, but if you are a tenanted or in a rural area, the chances of making the same amount in an urban area, you're highly unlikely to do it.
Yeah.
Combined with that, often, not always, the premises often also need a lot of, how do I say this, modernising. And it's a judgment between how you modernise them enough that they are what people want to visit, but also not how you modernise them too much and they'll be like, well, they're out of character with the village.
Yeah.
Don't really want to go. So you've got the financial side of whether your landlord, if you're a kind of a tenant in pub, is going to help you do it and what the cost implication of that on your business is.
Yeah.
But if you are a freehold and you can do what you like, if you disrupt the imagery too much,
yeah,
then that will also disrupt people from wanting to go.
So I'm going to avalanche you with loads of different things, and I want you to say if you feel these things have caused a decline in rural pubs. I'll start with staying in has become the new going out. If you go back just 20 years, we only had 4 channels on the TV.
Yeah.
Now you've got so many to choose from, and we've got Xboxes. We've got extra pressures, after school clubs and parents juggling children, and maybe the introduction of coffee bars and daytime drinking coffees and this cultural shift. Pubs are having to diversify to appeal to a broader section of people. Wine bars. I mean, are all of these things contributing? Am I close with that?
I think, if I'm being completely honest, and again, I do touch on this in my PhD, there's not one single factor.
It's lots and lots of things.
There's whole things that have gone into, if you use the analogy of the funnel, lots of different things over time
have eroded.
Some of them have come together, and then that's created your decline in number of pubs.
Yeah.
I also think, so I think you're absolutely right, the staying in, the new going out, but that's also linked to, as I said earlier on, time resources in some respects. It's also linked to income. It's also linked to kind of different shifts in perceptions towards kind of what a pub is or isn't. So again, if you go back 50, 60 years, mainly people would think pub, alcohol, meet friends. Now, obviously, as you said, some of them are diversified into coffee bars, these kind of things. So, but is that idea also getting out to the public?
Yeah.
But do they know that? So it's quite clearly, if you go to one of the branded coffee shops, quite clearly what you're going to get. And we automatically know that even if you go to one of the branded ones and it's got coffee in its name, for example, that you can get tea, you can get soft drinks, you can get water, you can get a whole range of beverages that isn't coffee.
Yeah.
Do we have that same notion about pubs? Some people do, but is it out there enough? Then you obviously put in different legislation. So over the time, smoking ban, the drink driving law, the changes in kind of legislation and policy changes. But then you've also got issues around kind of accessibility and policies around that. So again, taking my own village, 10 years ago, the public transport was in a better position than it is now. But people recognise that, so they've obviously had to learn to drive. So therefore, they're highly unlikely to use public transport. So you end up in this catch-22 scenario whereby you can offer it, but people now have got other means, etc., etc. So I think there is a whole range of things. I don't think you can ever put it to one thing. You might be able to say for different, and this is the other thing, every publican is kind of facing the same sort of challenges. Different pubs, they're unique in their way, who their clientele is. You cannot say what works in, I don't know, Wetherspoons is going to work in a sleepy little village somewhere else. You might have similar ideas, but it's also recognising that you can't have that Wetherspoons, Tesco, big kind of corporation models where everything is uniform.
Yeah.
Because life isn't uniform, and different areas, different things. So again, what works in rural Lincolnshire might not work in rural Cumbria, where they've got a big kind of like honeypot tourist trade for X amount months of the year.
Yeah. If I were to tell you what my vision of a brilliant rural pub is, I have to take the financial constraints out of it, because you can go to a supermarket and get a beer on a budget, but nothing comes out of a tin like it comes out of a rural pub. When you go and have a draft beer, or you have any beverage, even a soft drink, it tastes better out of a rural pub. It just does, because you're in the bosom of your community, if you like. You're in that space where you're surrounded by people that you want to be surrounded by. You're with your people. A rural pub adds value, but it comes at a price, and that price is only what it needs to be for that rural pub to still be there. Anybody who's running a rural pub these days has really, when they bought it, they actually bought a job. They didn't buy a pension. I've worked both. I've worked a fish and chip shop and I've worked a pub, and they are both hard jobs, long hours, unsociable hours, and you have to park all of your problems at the door and paint on a smile and go and be a host. That's what hospitality is. You have to do that. What's the fix, in your opinion, to breathe new life into the rural pub scene?
It's difficult because, as I said, there are so many factors here at play. Not least, and this is something, again, that I've come across quite a lot, there is a mismatch often between communities and pubs in terms of a lot of communities don't understand, and why would they, the intricacies of running a pub. They don't understand they may understand that it's a business, okay, but the intricacies around all the differences between freeholds, tenant, what it means, the whole thing of putting how your life on essentially hold to be a host, etc. A lot of people don't recognise that.
Yeah.
So you've got that aspect. You've also got the aspect that a lot of rural areas don't like change. Okay. So anything that those businesses do, if you like, to help either the community.
It's a risk, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's how embedded you are within the community, but it's also, are you known? So there's still an element of that, how do I say it? The sketch that always comes to me is the "Are you local?" sketch.
Yeah, local pub for local people.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, am I going to upset these people? But actually, I need to broaden my horizons in order to do it. So then it's a risk if you do it and you upset your locals, because then they can turn against you. But also, I mean, I've had some really bizarre quotes from my PhD, and actually I've published some of them in some of my articles, where people have said, I don't really use a pub, but I've moved to a village with a pub because that's what makes it a village. I've also had one where, and it sticks in my mind so much, which was along the lines of, well, if the pub closes down, I don't use it, so it's not going to actually bother me directly. But if it's boarded up, it just looks an eyesore and will impact on the village identity. So again, you've got these kind of mismatches between reality and kind of ideas.
Yeah.
And the problem is with that is it's much more entrenched in something called the rural idyll. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
I haven't.
So the rural idyll is an established kind of academic term, but also one that we can see being played out that reinforces how a village should be, how it should look, how it should feel.
Gotcha.
So examples being, if you ask the typical person what a village should be, they will say things like a village green, a pub, a community where people know each other, maybe a garage, it will have a shop or a post office. Those kind of elements.
Hopefully a chippy as well.
Yeah. And you see this, okay, this is reinforced in things such as Emmerdale, your soaps. They've all got those core aspects, not just that, but things like, I don't know, Midsummer Murders, or all those kind of things. When you're talking about ideal villages, they've all got elements. Another one is cricket and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what people think of. So that's what they want to move into.
Yes.
The problem is villages have never really ever functioned in that way. You've always had, okay, yes, now we have social media. But think about historically, you've always had neighbours and that talking over the garden fence. You've never ever really necessarily known everybody within the village. You've had the gossip side. And again, this is something we don't tend to think about. Those have always existed.
Yeah.
But they don't fit the image of the perfect, in inverted commas, village. So anything that disrupts that kind of idea upsets people.
Yeah.
Because they think it should be a particular way. So if you change a pub's name, for example, that can create no end of animosity and issues.
I did that once. I bought a pub called the Men of March, and it was historically where all the railway workers used to go. And the swinging sign above the pub had a steam locomotive on it. It was called the Men of March. And when I took the sign down, I had several people come and ask if they could buy the sign. Yeah. And I changed the name to Bar 23. And it met with so much resistance because historically, the railway yards had long since closed. March was a massive commercial railway yard. Yeah. From the port of Felixstowe, everything went through the March railway yards and then off to the rest of the country. But that had long since gone. The sleepers had been sold off to garden centres, and the Men of March just wasn't working. The pool team had long gone. The darts team had long gone. And I made it thrive as Bar 23. It was, I chucked a lot of my money at it, and then I sold it to Marsden's, who renamed it the Men of March, and it just eats tenants now.
Yeah.
So I totally take your point.
And I think there is something slightly different here between villages and kind of your towns, your small market towns. It's almost like some villages, including the one I live in, have a light of kind of, they're still back in some respects, 1970s, 1980s, where they want to retain those ideas of the past. And that's understandable. That's totally thing. We often look through things with rose-tinted glasses and things like that. But again, and this is the thing I think about, take what you've just said there. I'm guessing so actual March itself, was that where the pub was?
Yes.
Yeah. So to your listeners, I'm familiar with the Peterborough area. So again, you've probably, whilst you experienced kind of a lot of people saying, no, there would also be enough to be able to turn it and say, no, this can be.
They loved it. When I changed it, they loved it.
Exactly. So whilst you've got some people who are reticent, you've got others that are willing to embrace it.
But the Men of March had a few locals sat at the end of the bar nursing a pint all evening. They were never going to sustain it. And
that's where you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly how many rural pubs still are.
Yeah.
They are literally hemorrhaging money, if you like, because they're trying to keep the locals happy, shall we say. And that is very much entrenched within what I've just said about this idea of a perfect village. So we have this idea that I have a whole chapter on this, and it's kind of more established within geography literature. But again, it's that idea that towns and cities, we have to progress. We have to make progress. If things are going to work, we have to move with the times.
Yeah.
In rural areas, whilst we recognise that, we're more unwilling to embrace it.
Yeah. The romantic side of me says the rural pub shouldn't and mustn't evolve into something that stops it being a rural pub. What we need to do is pull people back so they fall in love with it all over again.
Yeah.
That's what my heart is telling me. The commercial side of me is saying, maybe the rural pub is dead and it's finished, but it isn't, because there are enough people out there that argue we should never change it. So I want to point the finger at the supermarkets and say, it's your fault. You're the ones that are, have ruined rural pubs. But it's not just that, as you said, there's a funnel, isn't there? There's so many things.
So many. At the minute, the cost of living crisis is really biting hard on any hospitality venue, wherever you are. But this is kind of no thing. So I'll draw another analogy. My car needed its MOT doing. Yes, I know I can get an MOT done cheaper in town, but I have a garage in my village where I can just literally drop it off, walk down, pick it up. Okay. Now, the ability to have that convenience comes at a cost. In other words, the MOT is at full price because the garage cannot function. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Can't afford to take the losses. So there's the convenience. There's also, for me, there's the trust element. I know this person. I've had my car MOT'd ever since I started driving many years ago.
Yeah.
They've been in the village all the time. I just leave my keys there. Do you know what I mean? If my house keys are on there as well, jobs are good and So you've got that element, but financially it often does come at a higher price.
Yes.
And again, when you're thinking about if you're having meals out in a pub, if you're looking, so obviously many pubs have diversified into food, Sunday roast, etc. One of the biggest draws in rural areas is local produce. Okay, and I'm sure it is in Petrou as well. I know it is. But that often comes at a price, and that price has to go somewhere. You can't just expect the commercial side to absorb it.
Of course.
So it is more expensive. And some people are like, well, I'm not paying that because I'm paying. But then at the same time, they're like, if they go to I want to say standardised venue with the standardised menu, etc., they're not happy with that either.
It's only going to be ordinary, isn't it? It's just not going to be special.
Yeah. So again, it's also with that, recognising the uniqueness that comes with it. There's also, entrenched with what I said about the rural Lidl, there's also imagery which goes against much of the government policies and ideas around other aspects. I'll give you an example. If you speak to people about rural pubs, one of the things that many of them will say is a fireplace.
Yeah.
Okay, and an open fire and things like that. Now, I've got an open fire myself in my own house. It's amazing. But obviously, we are being pushed as a society, and understandably, much more towards getting rid of fossil fuels.
Yeah, lowering our carbon footprint.
Yeah, so then you have that argument, and then it's like, well, our businesses down the line, okay, so we already know, like, policies to get rid of petrol and diesel cars, etc. Are we going to get to the point where, I don't know, down the line, we are advised not to have those within hospitality venues, for example?
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, how does that impact on, do you know what I'm saying, when you start to think about different ideas and things like that? But at the same time, if you are going to force, for example, a policy such as that on people, the cost to convert it from, for example, a log burner or an open fire is significant.
Yeah.
So what is going to be the impact of that? And that's where I'm now starting to kind of be really interested around in the intricacies of what people really want and how can pubs work with that within the constraints they've got. And again, it would be brilliant. And again, this is where the mismatch comes between community and the realities. For me to go into a pub and say, this is what your community wants, crack on with it.
Yeah.
But sometimes, most of the times, actually what the community wants is not doable because either it's not commercially or it's not time thing, or it's actually right from the get-go not viable.
Yeah, and it takes another layer off, doesn't it? Every time something like this comes along, it's another nail in the coffin, if you want to call it that. Are there any campaigns to stand up for rural pubs? I know at ministerial level that, the people that are making decisions in the country are being lobbied by everybody in hospitality over various subjects. But for the rural pubs themselves, is there a movement? Is there an organisation that are sticking up specifically for rural pubs?
So when we kind of look at that, there are organisations that are interested in rural pubs, but what we have to be really careful about is pubs are important across the spectrum, whether it be in a rural, urban, anything. So what we don't want to do, and what is really important, is that we don't kind of further that imagery that exists around the rural pub being hierarchically different. Does this make sense to other pubs?
Yeah.
So there are differences, but for example, a suburban pub can have the community aspect just as much as a village pub can be facing the same issues. So what you don't want to do is kind of take the emphasis there and just go urban, rural. There's obviously lots of grey in between.
Yeah.
So there are some organisations that, rather than focusing on rural themselves, they focus on the community aspect. So Pub is the Hub is one, Plunkett Foundation is another.
Yeah.
And again, it's much more around the community aspect. And also those kind of organisations do also help communities who are wanting to think about saving their pub or buying their pub. But again, that's another one of those, whilst there are some successful community-owned pubs, there is also the other side of the coin where many haven't sadly succeeded. And again, that often comes from the fact of the romanticised image that you said right from the beginning. Having that nice little thing, meeting everyone, close up at night, job's done, etc., etc. The realities of actually kind of raising the funds, keeping the business viable, etc., etc., come into play. So there are organisations out there, but predominantly the campaigns focus on pubs as a whole.
Yeah.
And again, I can understand that. And then the tending to be going much more towards community aspects and community ownership. And again, we've seen that also with policies. I mean, the one that springs to mind is David Cameron's Big Society.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the first images that he has and sticks in my mind is that idea of a whole community in front of a pub with a pint in their hand. Okay. To advertise that, if you like, that policy. But again, it's giving a romanticised view because, again, how many of the community can financially kind of put into share? If you can get to that point where you can get it up and running, who's taking responsibility? Are you running it as a business or are you running it as a kind of, because even, and again, this is something that I've come across quite a lot. When people think about community clubs, it's almost like they think they can just run it.
Yeah.
But you've obviously got to be, at least, as I said earlier on, breaking even in order to...
It has to be sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So people come with these kind of brilliant community ideas, and I'm not kind of dissing the ideas because they are brilliant ones.
Yeah.
But it's then working that within the intricacies of business. And again, one of the things that we haven't done particularly well, we are doing it better now with people like the Plunkett Foundation and Pub is the Hub. So the policies like, for example, the Big Society, where it's pushed like, oh, your community can buy this asset.
Yeah.
Great. How do you do it? How do you then run a business after it? Where's the knowledge behind it?
Who in the community is going to do the beer lines? Who's going to know how to do the beer lines?
Who to do it? Yeah. And that's the thing. So it's a bit like, I don't know, you could give somebody $500,000 and say, right, go and do this. But if they haven't got the knowledge...
Yeah. It's going to fail. It's doomed. Yeah, I do think over the years there have been several people that have stood in front of pubs, but I feel it's for their own ends rather than an example. To make himself look like a man of the people, you've had leaders of various political parties, one from Clacton who likes to stand with us, one with a pint in his hand. Jeremy Clarkson, he's a pub man these days instead of a petrol head. And, he seems to be doing quite well. David Cameron, they all seem to get something out of it for themselves. And the pub, they're using the pub just to endear themselves to their audience. You, on the other hand, produced this. And for the listener, I'm holding up. It's an amazing diagram. It's not a Venn diagram, but goes into great detail, pubs in the community and all of the challenges and potential solutions facing it.
Yeah.
And that's on your LinkedIn profile. I stole that from.
It is.
Tell me a bit about that, because it really does
encapsulate everything.
It's brilliant. I will get Stelios to put this in the show notes. If you've actually got a better picture than that and you can send it to me,
I have.
I'll put it in the show notes for the listeners to have a good look at. It's amazing.
I didn't produce that myself.
It's brilliant.
But what I had was a live graphic artist come in and encapsulate a knowledge exchange event that I ran. So obviously I'm fully aware that me and other academics, we approach things from a particular viewpoint. Okay, that's the way we kind of do research.
Yeah.
But historically, academics have sat in their ivory towers, if you like, and I'm not talking now, but I'm literally talking like 50, 60 years ago, and they've kind of said, right, this is what needs to happen, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
My work won't work like that. I can't sit and say, you need to do X, Y, or Z in order to make your pubs work. Why? Everyone will have similar challenges, but they will also have intricacies and differences as well, based on locality, based on what type of pub it is, a whole range of factors. So that poster came together as a result of having different people from different stakeholders, from campaign groups through to well-known people within kind of the industry, through to academics, through to also community members, people from camera as well, coming together. And I hosted the event, I ran the event, but I got some colleagues, academic colleagues, to say, this is the research that we've done so far. What else would be helpful for you guys? Okay. What do you want us to think? How can we work together? So how can we kind of have that co-production element to think about how can we make different aspects come to life? So, for example, making the public understand a little bit more, not obviously the intricacies and everything, but make them understand how the pub industry and many other hospitality industries are struggling at the moment and why they're struggling. Coupled with that, what is it that communities and kind of people who are using the pub, what do they want? What is achievable within the political, social and cultural landscape? We know that resources are tight at the minute, particularly financial resources. Yeah. So what can be done? So this was a kind of a culmination of us all coming together and all those conversations being captured through a live graphic artist who kind of did that for me whilst they're doing it. So the idea off the back of that is now we have that. Academics can kind of go to kind of certain groups or whatever and say, like, would you like to work on this piece of research with us? Or we're going to put this bid together to try and get some money to research this. Would you be a co-producer, for example, with that and kind of feed into that? And even if you can't be, what do you want us to do? What from us is going to help you?
Yeah, it's kind of a vision of what the blueprint of a sustainable rural pub might look like.
And it's about getting people together to kind of think, well, hang on a minute, we can work as a group. Yes, there are always going to be competing narratives. That's life. But it's about working together to think about who wants what. Now, within this, and this is the kind of the caveat with that whole poster, is that there are some industry bodies, if you like, who have a different vision. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's also being wary of that. Similar of also communities. Some communities are dead set that they want a specific thing in a specific way, and they're not willing to kind of move.
Yeah, they're too rigid, no compromise.
So that's the caveat with this. Okay, so it kind of, the people who were there were people who wanted to be involved in that co-production, who wanted to kind of engage with it. But there are some, and again, we have to be mindful of that, both at kind of like industry level, policy level, community level, all the different levels, who don't want to compromise. They've got a particular vision and that's their vision. So again, it's still a work in progress. So the idea off the back of that particular poster is now we're in the process of thinking, well, what research can we take forward? what is actually going to be more helpful for the majority, and how do we then take that? Because again, any research that an academic does will take about a year, 18 months. Yes, we can get kind of little outputs out at the time, but to get a full picture of what is happening, it takes time. So my PhD took 4 years.
Wow.
And again, if you look at any piece of academic research, to give it the credibility, you need time to be able to do that, to collect it, to analyse it.
Put it through the machine and gather the results. Yeah. There are plenty of people that want to use the pub to their own ends, as I already alluded. I guess being an academic, you're not in this for financial gain. You know, you've got a genuine passion and interest for the longevity and sustainability of rural pubs because of, you know, how it impacted on your own family, and you want it to be around for you to wander down to in years to come. At the beginning, I said I wanted to draw comparisons to my passion, which is fish and chips. I've got batter in my veins, which is probably why I have so many heart problems. But looking back at the last nearly hour's conversation, if we were to take rural pubs out of the conversation and just switch fish and chip shops into the conversation, it's a conversation that would almost fit into fish and chip shops, because fish and chip shops are a community hub. Like rural pubs, they are part of the fabric of rural communities. We are different at the coast to what we are in the villages. We are under immense pressure, not only with rising raw material costs, but also with the burden of shrinking disposable income with consumers. You know, we are seeing a decline in footfall as well as an increase in costs, which really, really reduces the size of the place where profit can exist. When costs go up and sales go down, profit shrinks. And I've been in the fish and chip business, as well as dabbling in pubs, for over 40 years. And I will sit here now and honestly say that I've probably got 2 more VAT quarters to go before I have to start pumping money in to stay afloat. And that is only rising costs and shrinking footfall. And I guess a lot of listeners have listened to me over the years and thought that, you know, maybe I'm doing something incredible with my business, but I'm feeling the pinch too. There is a way to navigate through these difficult times, even for rural pubs. What do you think the long-term prospect is? Will the pubs that don't reignite love from their communities and get footfall up? Will they end up falling by the wayside? Are we going to see a shift in attitudes? What do you see as the long-term future?
I think you're absolutely right. There's so many similarities, first of all, between pubs and fish and chip shops. So again, my own experience is rural fish and chip shops. You go there whilst the fryer is frying your fish, you're talking to somebody else in the village, you're kind of getting the interactions. You also make an interesting point about footfall, and this is something else that is similar to pubs, or pubs similar to fish and chip shop. Tastes are changing in some respects. So again, generationally, my students, for example, will have fish and chips, but to them, they're much more likely to go to a different type of takeaway type food.
Yeah.
Pubs, the same. There has been and there continues to be a movement away from, for example, kind of alcohol towards low alcohol. And again, part of that is taste, part of that is things like legislation, health, whole range of different things coming into play here. I think pubs recognise this. I think communities recognise this as well. And I think in terms of going forward for the sustainability, pubs are doing other things. So are fish and chip shops, actually, around kind of like trying to make modifications. So, for example, my own pub now has a book club, coffee morning. We get a different clientele in there. I know it laid out quite a lot to, for example, get the coffee machine to be able, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, barista style instead of a kettle and...
Yeah, so you've got things on that, but obviously that's a risk, because if you're going to buy those things, you need to know is it going to work?
Yeah.
So there's kind of mitigating risk is one, but I think this is where the co-production comes in.
Yeah.
And this is where working together is the key to unlocking. Let's actually say, what is the importance? We've done it with post offices. We've done it with banks. We know banks are closing left, right and centre. We know that people have kind of taken on board and they've set up like banking hubs.
Yeah.
Okay. So we know things can be done, but I think in order for it to happen, we have to showcase. Now, this is where it becomes more difficult depending on what type of pub you are. Because as you've said right from the outset, if you're a freehold, you can pretty much do within reason what you like. Okay. If you are a tenanted pub, can you do it? If you do it, are you going to be penalised for doing it because you're making more? So then you end up in this kind of mixture where the public also don't understand why some pubs can do things and some can't, or they interpret it as, well, that pub's much more community focused, but ours really ain't interested in that. It's not necessarily that they're not interested. It's much more along the lines of what you said right from the outset. Yeah. So I think part of it is getting that information out there. And that's why I'm interested in kind of working with communities and working with publicans and landlords to create things and have things like that poster that I can then go around different communities and show, look, this is the reality. You want your pub, you need to kind of work with things, work with people. Nothing will ever 110% be perfected.
No.
That's human life. We know that.
Yeah.
We always know there's going to be challenges as well. But it's kind of showcasing to communities as well, because again, I think a lot of rural pubs, communities have this idea, well, they've been here for so long, they'll be all right. I think the same is said about fish and chip shops, to be fair. Oh, they're part of our identity. They're part of our culture. They'll just be here.
Yeah. I think fish and chip shops, we are tailored to the needs of our own communities. We are, every menu in every chip shop is different.
Yeah.
Some of us fry in different oils. Our batter is always, different. And I know where you are, there's some great fish and chip shops.
Yeah.
But they'll be quite different to my fish and chips, and my community like my fish and chips. But we've been through the stage where we started doing fish and chips in kids' boxes because we were worried that there was a generational shift and that we were an ageing customer base. Probably the same way that rural pubs started selling hooch and breezers and Alco Pops back in the noughties or the 90s. It's not what defines a village chippy, and it's not what defines a rural pub. We have to stay true to ourselves, but we have to make people fall in love with us again.
Yeah. And part of that is the charm that it is. And this goes back to what I said about them not being universal.
Yeah.
Yes, we know what a fish and chip shop is, but we all have, it's even me, there are some great fish and chip shops in Lincolnshire, as there are around the country. But I have my favourites.
Yeah.
Okay. And why do I have my favourites? Probably because they do batter. Do you know what I mean? Different things. So we have that, and that's actually something to be celebrated rather than kind of thing, because if everything's the same, it's a bit boring.
It is.
If everything becomes standardised the same.
Yeah.
And again, there is a marketplace for that. As I said to you, some of the supermarkets, some of the branded coffee chains, they're specifically done away so that it is uniform.
Yeah.
But not everybody wants that. I mean, it's like, I don't know, my passion other than kind of pubs is drinking hot chocolate. I love hot chocolate.
Right.
But, okay, you go to a standard place and they make it how they make it.
Yeah.
I like mine, for example, just so that the milk is just slightly turning to been burnt. Not that it's burnt, but you know what I'm saying. So it's very particular how I like it. And some people will do it, and some people will be like, not really, can't do that.
Yeah.
You know they can do it, but it goes against.
It's an extra 30 seconds in the steamer. That's all, just to get it super hot.
But then they're also worried that if they were to burn the milk, I would go and complain, etc., etc.
Gotcha.
So it's like balancing that, but also I think there is a knowledge mismatch. And again, I think this also happens with the campaign groups. So you get big industry bodies saying, support our campaigns.
Yeah.
What are you actually going for? So when they're talking about, I don't know, VAT cuts or the business speak, if you like, does the community understand that?
No, not really.
So are you going to sign something that you don't understand?
Yeah, and again, in the fish and chip industry, there are some big fights going on, and the platform to promote the virtues of fish and chips is given up in favour of using it as an opportunity to drive home a political message about cutting VAT or complaining about business rates. And there needs to be balance. I think if we end up as an industry that is always asking for reductions in this and complaining about that, we miss the opportunity to say what a brilliant industry fish and chips is and how important rural pubs are. So we have to pick our battles carefully. I think the opportunity to promote far outweighs the opportunity to lobby and to ballot. And I think we need to do that really behind closed doors. Any opportunity to promote, we have to seize with both hands. And I feel as though that's the same for rural pubs. Yeah. The thing that you do is you shout about how important they are, not complaining about how they're struggling.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is so important.
And I think that's the kind of the way I approach it is you've got lobbyists, okay, that's existed for a long time. You've got industries who will be saying, we need to see X, Y, and Z. You will have publicans you can find most people, if I said to you today, please go and find me a publican who's willing to talk about
how shit it is,
how they need government help, you'll find that.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's easy. What you don't find so much is people in the community saying, well, this is my lifeline.
Yeah. This
is how I'm meeting Joe Blogs.
This makes getting up worthwhile.
Yeah, and also think about when we think about rural pubs in particular, also applicable to some urban pubs, how they are there at some of people's most important moments in life.
Yeah, you're right.
So,
you're right.
Weddings, okay? Many weddings, kind of particularly in my village, often will go and use the
You've
pub.
got to start in the pub before you go to the church. Got to.
Yeah.
Got to.
Dare I say it, when somebody's died?
Yeah.
How many wakes are in pubs?
You've got to celebrate somebody's life more than mourn their loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christenings.
Wet the baby's head.
Yeah. So you've got all these things. Also, things like if your local community football team has won or whatever, or there's some kind of, I know definitely like in my village, when there's kind of national events, there's often a kind of a celebratory event linked to the pub as well.
Yeah.
So again, but how often do we hear that within the media? What you tend to hear within the media, and this is not having to go at anyone or anything like that, stories come and go within the media around the loss of the pub, but then they don't really, so they'll say there's this loss, but what is that actual loss? What does that actually mean to the people?
What's the price people pay?
Yeah. And it's kind of like people say that it's important, but it's not actually until somewhere's lost it and you can showcase. So a lot of people will say, and again, this is no kind of criticism towards anybody, but the media are often interested when a pub is about to close.
Yeah.
Okay. That's understandable because they're trying to save that business from closure. But if you really want to showcase what the impact is, go to somewhere where the pub has closed and speak to those who have lost it.
Yeah.
To then say, this is the powerful message. This is what happens when it's lost.
Yeah.
This is why you need to start engaging with it or kind of understanding it, because otherwise they will be gone. And when they're gone, can they be resurrected? Well, yes, everything can be if you want it to be.
Yeah.
But do we want to get to that stage? I certainly don't want to. And again, you start to see different things. So I know another academic, very friendly with him, who does kind of like much more of the economic side with rural pubs. And some of his work has identified that when a village loses a pub, it can have an impact on house prices.
Yeah. Well, it can, massively.
So again, here we're starting to see, but does the community realise that?
Yeah. I do think that the fabric of our community, the fibres that hold it together are chip shops and rural pubs and post offices, as you've already said. I wasn't sure if you're aware of a programme that's about to air or start airing with John Richardson, who's saving a rural pub. Yeah. I've only seen trailers for it. I haven't watched it yet. Do you know anything about it? Have you had any input on it?
I haven't had any input. I have, like you, seen the trailers. I think anything that gets kind of exposure to pubs and the importance of them is important.
Yeah.
But again, this is the other thing that we have to think about. And it goes back to what I said for me around the rural idyll. What type of pub is being created? What's the imagery around that? So You've already mentioned somebody else who's gone into kind of having a rural pub.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a particular narrative around that. That narrative now has spun off into merchandise and different aspects.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I can fully understand that because there's business decisions behind it.
Yes.
But are you, and this is the question that I would pose, are you creating or trying to create a livable real life rural pub? Or are you trying to create the imagined, perfected rural pub?
Yeah. Well, I think we know the answer to that.
That's the danger. So if you continually...
It's a money grab, isn't it? Let's be honest.
So if you then create an imagined reality, the danger with that, and this is what came out very much in my research, is people then succumb to, well, that's what a rural pub should be like. They then visit your everyday rural pub in different villages and it doesn't meet those expectations.
Yeah.
And it won't meet them because actually it's a manufactured reality.
Yeah.
They're then like, oh, don't really like that. Don't really want to go there. It's not what I anticipated it to be. So
it's a letdown.
It's a letdown to them and they don't want to go back. And again, that comes out in my research time and time again, where I've had people who have migrated into rural living, shall we say, so they've basically retired. They've decided they want to kind of come to a rural area to retire. But their imagery of the village and the rural pub in particular has been shaped by what they've seen on TV, what they've seen.
What their expectations are.
Yeah, what they've read about within kind of literature or whatever.
Yeah.
They then come to rural areas and then they're disappointed with what they're greeted with because it's not what they anticipated. And that's not just pubs, that's kind of rural life being, it falls into this rural idyll. So again, I think sometimes whilst kind of shows and that are brilliant at showcasing some of the importance and actually, as I say, I'm all for things. I mean, I would absolutely love to do something around kind of like the importance of pubs to rural areas and how it links to history and heritage and how it links to, for example, right at the very kind of thing, the Dick Turpin, okay? The pub just up the road from me in a village is linked to that story.
Okay.
But not many people know that. So could we showcase that?
Yeah.
Could we link it together? Would that be more interested for the community? Would the community want to get involved? Those kind of aspects to it. But the danger alongside any of these things is you can't promote just a romanticised village. We cannot, as I said right from the off, paint pubs as always being this inclusive, rosy for everybody. They weren't that. Yes, they've kind of become much more that. But even now, there are some people who feel excluded within those spaces and don't want to go and feel that they wouldn't fit in them. So again, it's about recognising the realities, both historical realities and kind of why people might not want to use them. And also kind of thinking about, well, hang on, we need to present an accurate picture. If we keep promoting a romanticised feature, we're basically putting off our nose to spite our face because you're creating something that you can't sustain.
Yeah.
And the impact then on the wider rural pubs can be detrimental because, again, if you've got these perfected one or two pubs that you think have got all the elements that people want, then you start to create something that doesn't exist. People want something that doesn't exist, and you're starting to chase something that's never existed. I mean, one of the things that comes across very much in my research is what consumers want is a hybrid.
Yes.
They want a mixture of history and heritage combined with the modernity and the comforts of today. So when I ask people to describe to me what your perfect village pub would be, the typical things you would get would be swinging signs, open fire, a bar. But then they'd also say things like, well, I want decent food and I want comfy surroundings. But they will define that as a traditional pub.
Yeah.
And that's also, you've got to be mindful of that, because if you say to somebody, what's a traditional pub? The answer they give you, well, one, it'll be different amongst different people anyway. But two, if you just ask the general population, they will say things like cosy, warm, swinging side.
You get a different answer from everyone.
You'll get a different answer from everyone. But again, if you really dig down into it, nobody wants a real traditional pub with spit and sawdust, no toilets as such, or outdoor toilets. Nobody really wants that.
No, the same.
No matter how you talk about it.
The same way that you have your thing for hot chocolate. If I go into a rural pub and they've got bar billiards, I'm made up, because you just don't see bar billiards anywhere.
No.
And bar billiards was only invented for people that don't have room for a pool table, because you can play bar billiards, in a very small space. You just don't see it anywhere anymore. That for me that's a big tick. But everybody will have a different idea of what a rural pub would look like. Yeah. I like the idea of coming up with a list of what a sustainable, future-proofed rural pub will look like, what it will have. But the fact of the matter is, it's too big a box to put everything into.
It's too big a box, and it's also, and this is the other thing that you have to be really careful with rural pubs, is we are conditioned, if you like, to see new venues popping up in cities, particularly university cities, for example. It's quite common to see new clubs, new pubs just come into space. In rural areas, that's not so.
Every time you lose one, there's never a new one coming along.
There's never a new one coming in. And also, if one was just to come in, okay, would the community accept it as well?
It would be too sterile, wouldn't it? It would be...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the incremental changes, there's something about those buildings.
They need to be aged.
That have got the history. I mean, some of my pubs that I did for my research, at certain times of the year, would have events that would showcase, for example, Armistice Day. They would have a table set up with photos of people who have been, and that would act as a way for people to come in and kind of socialise and see that. They would also, for example, there's something about, and it sounds really weird, but even I fall for this. If you go into my local, it's set out pretty much, yes, obviously there's been some changes and modernisations, as with everything.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, the set out is the same as where my granddad went.
Yeah. Familiarity.
I go there, familiarity, but I can also, it's almost like, yeah, my granddad used to sit over there.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a connection to me to that place and that particular aspect. That's not just, because obviously things have to be modernised, brought up to date. That's understandable, but the exterior and that's, whether you look at a picture of the pub in my village from 100 years ago and whether you look at it now, yeah, the name's changed. But the fabric of the building, you can still look at it and say, yeah, that's...
Morris dancers. Give me some Morris dancers. Oh, honestly, I love a Morris dancer.
Yeah. And this is where we get to the bit where my research is going is how can we co-produce something? And you're never going to please everybody. If you try that, you're doomed to fail from the off, because as you've said, you can't do it.
You spread too thin.
But how can we think about showcasing the importance of these things, what they used to offer, what do communities like about that? Is there certain things that they don't like? Can the industry, as you like, would it take on board those? Maybe depends what type of pub you've got. And it's going also making the community aware that actually, because it's really weird, but one thing that I've often taken this for granted and assumed people know this, mainly, I suppose, because I research pubs. So to me, it's kind of everyday knowledge. But if you talk to members of the community, they don't actually understand the differences, for example, in pub ownership.
Yeah.
They just put it down as, it's a pub. It can do X, Y, or Z. So maybe, is there a way that we could communicate to the community. Well, different pubs are limited by what they can do without going, and this is a challenge in its own right. We've all said there's lots and lots of intricacies around the models.
There are.
Okay. And many publicans, many academics don't fully understand them. So you can't expect the community to understand them. But if you kind of put it in lay terms like you did at the beginning, when you said, right, freehold, you can buy your own beer from somewhere. If you're a Tide pub, if people are more aware of that, then maybe their expectations become modified towards, well, hang on a minute, if we push too far, we're not going to have a village pub anymore because we're going to tip it over into the next, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So let's start with this aspect or that aspect. And I think it's that co-production is the key, that kind of working with each other.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's because I move around the fish and chip scene more, but my social media, I see a lot more of what fish and chip shops do versus what rural pubs are doing.
Yeah.
Rural pubs don't seem to be as, and hopefully you'll correct me, they don't seem to be as media savvy when it comes to the use of social media. Whereas fish and chip shops, I think they get the fact that we are woven into the fabric of our own communities, and I think we have greater penetration with our own audiences on social media than rural pubs do. Would you say that was fair?
I think it depends where you are. I say this to my students all the time. This is also something else to bear in mind. The infrastructure of many rural areas isn't the best.
Yeah.
For the same internet package that I've got, my students get for half the price than I do.
Yeah.
Okay, for example. There are other factoring costs. So I know, for example, that some rural pubs want to kind of showcase what they can do, but who's their clientele?
Yeah.
Are they going to be the ones using social media, for example? Also, is there a benefit to them using it? Some, yes, absolutely, you're right. And again, I obviously am on social media and I do get a lot of rural pubs follow me. But again, is that because of what I do? Or have they even got time to, and this is the other thing that kind of I think the community as a whole sometimes forget, that a landlord is working when they're not open.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is so true.
So they could be up at 6 a.m. with the barrels.
Yeah.
And then kind of thing. Have they got the time even to engage with social media?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different factors. I also know that, for example, a lot of them tailor. So again, if you think about my pub, it doesn't have a national social media presence. It has a very local media presence. So for example, it's on the local Facebook group.
Yeah.
It knows that its predominant clientele is kind of its village and the surrounding areas. So it uses that. So again, I think it's much more of they probably are using it, but we don't see
it as much.
We don't see it as much as some of the more established, stronger rural pubs who have been able to diversify. So I know some of them, for example, that have done internet classes, particularly during COVID, like classes that show people how to use the internet and how to meet online, You take your own laptop, But some areas, you can't simply do that because the infrastructure's not there.
Yeah.
And then that goes outside of what we were talking about before, as in our rural areas. Do they get the same government funding, for example, as urban? Do you see what I'm saying? So then you're starting to get into the urban-rural divide, and then you can pull it down as into the north-south urban-rural divide, and then it starts really escalating into different aspects, because many would argue that rural areas by default don't get the same kudos, shall we say, as urban areas. The south gets more kudos than the north. We know that's established. Kind of, you can hear that in politicians when they're saying they want to bridge the divisions and the gaps. But what we don't tend to think about is the urban, rural and the businesses within those. So again, Lincolnshire, I mean, I'm sure you will know this, but I don't know whether most of your listeners will. Very rural.
Yeah.
No motorways at all. Very kind of back country roads. Not the ideal place where you would necessarily want to set up a big business or anything like that. So again, there's issues around infrastructures and roads.
Lincolnshire's not on the road to somewhere. You're not going through Lincolnshire to get anywhere other than the North Sea.
No. There's absolutely no point when you're thinking about rural pubs of advertising it, I don't know, nationally say, come to Lincolnshire, da-da-da. Whereas, let's use Peterborough.
Yeah.
Okay. Peterborough's on the East Coast Main Line down to London.
It is, yeah.
If you want to get out off at Peterborough or the train breaks down or whatever and you get out of Peterborough, you can go out and look around Peterborough.
Yeah, yeah.
Things like that you don't get in Lincolnshire because, I mean, you might do in Grantham because it's on obviously the Mace Coast.
Margaret Thatcher was born there.
But if you want to get anywhere out of those particular areas, you've got there's no buses. So essentially you've got to be kind of taxiing. And then you get into factors like, well, is an Uber. So if I want an Uber here where I live, not a chance.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, that also changes things like, for example, what you were saying about the fish and chip shop. There is absolutely no way I could kind of dial up an Uber or whatever and get a delivery sent to me. It's common. And again, when I talk to my students, they find this bizarre that I can't just ring up and ask for a takeaway.
Well, I know you've got the Elite and you've got Burton Road. They're two great fish and chip shops. I don't know if they're near where you are, but they're not far. Well, I'll just say for the listeners, there are others, but I know both those guys and they do fish and chips really well. I'm not sure if they do deliveries or not. And
again, that's one of the other things, because of how rural Lincolnshire is, a lot of businesses can't afford to do.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work as a business model.
I get that.
And also, in some respects, that also gives it a community aspect, because there's something quite special about having to go out, wanting to go out, and then speaking to people. And there's something special and unique about that aspect as well. So again, it's not just it's exactly what you said from there. It's that community.
Yeah.
And think about the crossover that we get from that as well. So the amount of people who will say to me, particularly in rural areas, they need something doing, whether it's plastering, plumbing, electrics, whatever.
Yeah.
How they found somebody who, off a friend of a friend within the pub, they can recommend. Do you know what I mean? So again, there's other aspects to it that we don't think about.
Yeah, that's why pub works so well. Claire, I'm going to wind up in a few minutes. I could literally talk to you about this all day, but I know we both have to get on with our lives. Where can people find out more about your research, what you've done? Is there somewhere available? Do you have any links or anything published?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. Sometimes I'll do media things, podcasts. Sometimes I'll do more academic writings.
Yeah.
For my academic writings, and to even get a copy of my PhD, you can go to my university page where it's my staff profile, and it will give you an overview of my work and tell you where to find that. If you want the more accessible aspects, for example, like the media stuff I've done, the podcasts I've done.
And you were on BBC Look North recently, weren't you?
Yeah, I was on. Yeah, so I've been on BBC Look North. I've done things for the Morning Advertiser.
Yeah.
So you can find things like that mainly through just kind of searching my name. It kind of comes up quite
easily.
Quite well, yeah. People can obviously get hold of me through social media. I'm very open to kind of, as I said, that community thing, working with people, seeing what we can do, what sort of things we want. Because again, as I said right from the off, I'm an academic who is much more interested in the practical sides of actually making this happen, as well as obviously I have to write academic papers. It's part of my job.
Sure.
And I love doing that. But the average academic paper is full of jargon, etc., that many of the community wouldn't necessarily be interested in doing. So I'm very interested in getting my work out there, my ideas out there through different types of format, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel as though we could scratch the surface and go deeper into various aspects, and maybe if it's okay with you, we'll have you back again.
Yeah.
If something props up in the media that I think you would be really useful to get your opinion on, I'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye.